All right. Hello, everyone. It is 1:10 here on the West Coast. I assume I can safely say good afternoon to everybody. I assume some people are still going to be trickling in, so we'll start off slow and see how things go. At any time, feel free to post your messages, questions, comments in the chat, under the session chat, if you would, rather than the global event chat. You can encode them in some way, like Stacy and Steve have chosen to, but I cannot guarantee that anyone present will be able to decode them on the fly quickly enough to answer your question. So plain text English preferred. This is codes and ciphers for beginners. So I hope that's what you're here for. I just wanted to point out that this is definitely going to be a beginner's level talk. It'll be a quick overview of a few of the historical ciphers of interest and how they're applied. Um, so because it's a beginner level talk and we've only got 45 minutes and there's supposed to be some time left at the end for questions and discussion, I've been careful to limit myself to 117 slides. I'm sorry, 17-ish slides. So we'll have plenty of time to take it easy and go through things at a leisurely pace. If you need me to speed up, slow down, stop talking entirely, again, go ahead and post in the chat. So let's kick this off. If I can figure out how to advance slides with all of this. Okay. So a quick, who am I? My name's Jeremy Tavan. I'm in the Information Security Office in the Security Operations team here at Stanford. And I need to apply a disclaimer and say that I am neither a cryptologist nor a cryptographer. I just enjoy puzzles and solving problems and have enjoyed code breaking in various information security events and tournaments and the like. So I know that we have representatives here from many fine academic institutions, which have very knowledgeable cryptographers on their faculty. And if any of those are present, I apologize in advance. This is going to be a session produced by and targeted at amateurs. And so if you really want to learn this stuff in any sort of detail, I definitely recommend taking some of their classes, especially if you're interested in any of the developments since the latter portion of the 20th century, because we just don't have time to cover everything, and the math gets really exciting. So once again, I'm a dabbler, but I hope to share some of the fun with you. I want to also acknowledge my co-worker, Carol Gao from SLAC Cybersecurity, who is also not a cryptologist or cryptographer, but helped me with some of the research and preparation for this presentation. So thanks, Carol. I believe that she is in the room now and should be available on chat to collect questions and forward them on to me. Also with us, I think we have TC Chen from the Information Security Office here, who will be helping out if anyone is having technical difficulties or if my video or audio cuts out or anything like that. So thank you both for your assistance. With all of that said, let's get started and ask why do information security folks study codes and ciphers or play with codes and ciphers? And so the obvious answer is that it's part of our business. Confidentiality is part of the information security triad, the CIA triad. And so as we serve our businesses, our institutions in providing uh, risk analysis, uh, what is the risk that is associated with a given information system or service? Uh, One of those risks can be a breach of confidentiality, where valuable or sensitive information could be disclosed by a failure to adequately protect it in transit. And so if we understand the likelihood of that through understanding codes and ciphers, we can provide a more reasoned answer to that question. although I will admit that that is only very peripherally related to why I'm interested in them. I'm interested in them because it's fun. Uh, codes and ciphers are easily gamified. They fit really well into a tournament or challenge or quiz game type format. And they also have the advantage that you don't need to provide a whole lot of technical context. You don't need to teach people software in order to let them have fun breaking codes. You just provide them the ciphertext and see what they come up with. So it makes it really fit in very well to, say, a CTF challenge. And some of you may have participated in our Cyberfest CTF last year, where there were a number of cipher questions. So that's the main reason why I do this stuff. So with that behind us, let's talk about some of the vocabulary that we're going to be using here. And we'll start with what is a code versus what is a cipher. So a code is not necessarily a secret code, although that is a subset of codes. Codes are where you take message components and you change them around into arbitrary different symbols. And there can be a bunch of different reasons why you would do that. Uh, sure, you could be doing it because you have a secret that you want to convey to someone. And so maybe you have a little book that translates a word into a meaning. So if I say banana, it means flee, we are discovered. And if I say hopscotch, it means something else. And so you also have that code book. And when I say to you banana, you know to start packing your bags. Um, but codes are more than that. So codes can also be, for example, maybe we are at opposite ends of a weak radio connection, a poor quality radio connection, and we need to be able to send messages to each other. So we can change our text message into Morse code, which is really easy to send over the radio. You simply are either transmitting a signal or not. And so you have long beeps and short beeps and pauses between them. And from that, you can convert back into text, even over a fairly weak radio connection or telegraph line. Or maybe you're talking via voice and you want to make sure that there's no question of understanding of the acronyms that I'm saying to you. So we will translate them into the NATO phonetic alphabet. That's a coding scheme. So it's any time we manipulate our message parts and change them into symbols. So that's opposed to a cipher, which is a transformation of a message in order to disguise it. So you use some sort of algorithm to mix up a message so that only someone else who knows the algorithm and possibly is in possession of a key can decode it. And so we'll talk about a few of the methods of ciphering, excuse me, in this talk. So I'll talk about monoalphabetic substitutions, polyalphabetic substitutions, and then of course there's all the wonderful modern mathematics-based ones that we will only mention briefly and not in any detail. So then we have cryptography, study of codes and ciphers. That's what we're doing here. And cryptanalysis, which is the practice of breaking codes and ciphers. And in fact, it's actually more general than that. Anytime you have a system and you don't know how it works or what the keys are to it, what's the mechanism, and you're simply observing it and trying to understand it and figure out its workings, that's cryptanalysis. Uh, And so the other things that we need to talk about are plain text. That's what you're reading. That's a message before it is encoded or enciphered. And then once you've done so, it becomes ciphertext. And that's what we're trying to understand and trying to pass on to our recipients without it being read by someone else. So the majority of this session is going to be sort of a historical browsing, roughly chronologically, on uh, different ciphers. But before we begin, I want to put a plug in for this book. It's really good. You should read it. It takes the history of secret messages and conveys it in a way that is both highly accessible and also has sufficient detail to be really interesting from a technical standpoint. But let's talk about the problem statement. Why are we bothering with ciphers? Why have people throughout history bothered with ciphers? I mean, it boils down to I want to get a message to someone else without it being intercepted or understood by anyone unauthorized. And if you and at that simple level, ciphers are one way to accomplish that. Before we talk about ciphers uh, in depth, I want to take a brief detour and talk about a parallel concept of steganography and spycraft. The basic premise here being if nobody notices you're sending a message, they're not going to read it. So it doesn't matter as much if it's in plain readable text because they won't be looking for it. And so this is a separate discipline. There's some overlap. You can encipher something before you hide it elsewhere. But it's a separate discipline, but I did want to cover it because it really serves sort of the same purpose. And also because in those CTF challenges and whatnot that I've mentioned, uh, these frequently come up. So it's good to be aware that they exist. Um, some of the earliest documented examples that we've read about are from ancient Greece and ancient China. Now, these may be apocryphal, but they're at least plausible. So, I mean, these could have happened. Um, there's a story from ancient Greece about uh, taking someone and having them shave their head, write the message on their scalp, wait for the hair to regrow, because clearly we're not in a huge hurry to get this message to its recipient. And once the message is sufficiently obscured by the hair, you send the person to the recipient where they are not intercepted on the road because they don't appear to be carrying anything. And then they shave their head, they show it to their recipient who can read it. In ancient China, uh, the method, or there was a method documented where messages would be written on a fine piece of silk and then wadded up into a little ball, coated in wax, and swallowed. And then the messenger goes to their destination, and the message eventually comes out and can be cleaned off and read. Um, if we fast forward a little bit to um, over 1,000 years, and we start looking at medieval and Renaissance times, we start seeing people talking about using invisible ink. So there are some substances where you can write on a piece of paper in what is effectively a clear fluid, but when you heat it, it chars and turns brown, and suddenly it's readable. Um, and that's been used throughout history. You can write on the back, say, of an innocuous document, and then the message becomes legible once the paper is heated. Or in modern days, we've got fluorescent inks. So you write in a clear fluid and then shine ultraviolet light at it, and the message glows. Uh, Other things that have been used, you can take your message and shrink it really tiny, using advanced printing optics, and then you can just attach it to another innocuous document, but it just looks like a dot. But your recipient can then enlarge it significantly and read the message on that little tiny dot. Or if you've prearranged with your recipient, you just know that I'm going to drop a piece of trash in a certain location, and then I'll walk away, and you will come by a little later and pick it up. And there's no evidence that that's a message. It could just be me being sloppy. So if people don't know you're passing messages, great. Today, you could hide your messages in a flood of social media comments. Find some account that just has millions of followers, and so every time they post a picture of their breakfast, 100,000 people respond, and you put your secret messages in there. No one reads that many of the comments. Or you can today, with the help of a computer, you can embed messages inside pictures without or audio files without significantly changing what they look like. So it's not apparent that there's a message at all. There's just a picture. So let's say I run a website and I want to get messages out to people. I can change the header image on my website to contain a variety of messages that change periodically. And unless you know to look for it, you're not going to bother. So all that said, those are ways to convey a message that's unlikely to be intercepted because nobody notices it's there. But let's say you need to send a bunch of messages, and these methods are either not high enough bandwidth or they haven't been discovered yet. Um, and so let's talk about the first well-documented cipher used for military purposes. And this is one of the most famous ciphers of all. It's attributed to Julius Caesar. I don't know if he invented it or if this is just the first well-documented use. I suspect the latter. So what did he do? He just transposed the alphabet, rotated it by 3. So A becomes D, B becomes E, C becomes F, etc. So if you had this message, meet at Memorial Church at dawn tomorrow, and you run it through this cipher, it's a simple algorithm, just add 3 to each letter, you end up with this, which to a casual observer looks like gibberish. Uh, and this was a long time ago. This was used for a long time. I'll talk a little bit later about why you shouldn't use it today. Um, but does anyone remember these? Does this look familiar to anybody? Sometimes you would get them, I don't know, in a Cracker Jack box or as a part of a kids club membership. It's a secret decoder wheel. So this is what you use for these rotation ciphers, and it's literally rotation. You take the two wheels and you rotate the A on one wheel to line up with the associated letter on the other wheel. So for example, for the Caesar cipher, you line up A with D, and then you can use that as a translation table for your message. It can be used for both encoding and decoding. Anyway, we'll come back to those later because they actually do still apply to other ciphers. And so in summary, these are called monoalphabetic substitution ciphers. That is, I've got my plain text alphabet, and then I substitute for a single ciphered alphabet in a different order or completely mixed up. So you could be a 3-character rotation, it could be a 6-character rotation, or you could just completely scramble it. You could take a completely random string with A through Z in a random order. They're all called monoalphabetic substitutions, and they're not a secure cipher. These were broken with some regularity throughout history, and I'll talk about how shortly. But I thought this might be a good time to pause and have us go and actually try our hands at decoding a monoalphabetic substitution cipher. Now this looks a little bit different, but I've provided the key. And I ran this past my 13-year-old kid. So theoretically, you shouldn't need any more instructions than what I've just said. To decode this, feel free to drop an answer in the chat. I'll wait a few seconds, a minute or so, to give people time to see if they can decode this. This is what's called a Pigpen cipher or a tic-tac-toe cipher. And the key can really be in whatever order you want. And this is just a monoalphabetic substitution. Um, each letter becomes a symbol, and it's always the same symbol for that letter. So let's see who can figure out what this says first. And we have an answer already. That was faster than expected. Way to go, Tom. And TJ got it. All right. So are we having fun yet? Excellent. So it turns out that monoalphabetic substitution ciphers are flawed, and they're flawed in a couple different ways, which make them fairly easy to break even if you don't have the key. So I figured you might want to try it out. So I've dropped a block of ciphertext at the paste bin address that's on the screen. And it's just a block of text that's been encoded with a monoalphabetic substitution. You can see it here. There's also a link to a tool, or you can just do it however you like. But it turns out that there are tools that computers can help us solve these really, really fast. Given only the hint that this is actually English, this decode.fr site will automatically decrypt this message. And you paste it in, you hit decrypt automatically, and in a second, less than a second, it pops this out, this result. And wow, how did it do it? So uh, the main technique, the cryptanalytical technique that's being used here is frequency analysis. So we know what English looks like in terms of, which letters are common in English, which letters are rare, which digraphs, pairs of letters are common in English, and which ones are rare. And so if you take your ciphertext that has been ciphered with a monoalphabetic substitution and perform frequency analysis on it, you can look for the peaks. So the most common letter in your ciphertext probably is E in clear text and the like. And so you can start with frequency analysis to get your first one or two letters. And then you can start inserting them into your ciphertext in the right places. And then you can look at short words because there's not that many two-letter words, one-letter words, two-letter words in English, and then three-letter words. And so each time you find one of those words, that gives you another part of the key. So for example, uh, if I find a three-letter word that ends in E, it could be the, it could be she, but there aren't that many of them, and that we can then take those additional S and H or T and H and substitute those in and start building out our translation table. And it turns out computers can do this really fast. It turns out that it didn't get exactly the right alphabet. I think it swapped Z and X, each of which show up, I think, once in this block. Didn't have much to work with. But you can also, especially if you've got a computer, you can check your output against a dictionary and say, well, is this English? How close is this to English? How many of these words are valid English words? And you know how close you are to solving it. This method of frequency analysis was first documented in the 9th century by the Muslim philosopher and scientist Al-Kindi. He was talking about doing it in Arabic, but the same principle applies in English just as well. So clearly, this method was pretty seriously broken, and something stronger was needed. Now, it turns out it doesn't take a whole lot to make a much stronger cipher. All you have to do is take your rotated alphabet and use several different rotations for different letters, because that will decrease the efficiency of frequency analysis. So we come to the Visionnaire cipher, which actually was first described by Giovan Battista Bellaso, but it was named after Blaise de Visionnaire, uh, who actually came up with a somewhat stronger cipher about like 30 years later, but uh, it's named after him anyway. So what this does is your recipient has to know the key to your message. And so you do have this issue where you need to have some way to convey a key to your recipient for them to be able to decode your messages. Um, but that aside, no, that's not impossible. Um, you then use that key to index into this set of different uh, ciphered alphabets. So let's take a really quick example. Let's say your key was dog, and your message is, "We attack at dawn." So you just repeat dog, 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 dog um, over your message. And so when you encode your first letter, W, you use this alphabet under D. And so you come up with a cipher text letter of Z. Then you use O, the O alphabet for your next letter. And so you remember that magic decoder wheel, you can actually use that for this, except instead of just setting the wheels once, you just reset the wheel each letter and use that to help you encode, which makes it relatively practical. And so these were used for about 300 years before being broken in the mid 1800s. I think the first documented true break for this type of cipher was documented by Friedrich Kasiski in 1863, although Charles Babbage had been breaking these ciphers for some years before that, since 1854 at the latest. Um, but that's still 300 years of pretty solid secret messaging from a fairly easy to implement cipher. So that was a pretty efficient approach. We don't really have time to go into the full mechanism for breaking this cipher, but I thought we could go through the first part. And so, given a block of text that you suspect is encoded with a Visionnaire cipher, the first step is figuring out how long is that key that you're repeating over and over to determine uh, how to encode the message. And so what Kosiski documented was that if you have a long string of characters that repeats in the message, it's highly likely that that is actually the same string of clear text that happens to sit, to align on the same letter of the key. And so by looking at the spacing between those two instances of the same text, you can figure out all the possible lengths of that key. So if we look at this ciphertext, we see that the string EGQLVT occurs at two positions, at position 20 and position 60. That's a distance of 40. So it could be a 40 character long key repeated once, or a 20 character long key repeated twice, or a 10 character long key repeated 4 times. But it gives us a set of possibilities. Now, we've also found a second string here of 4 characters that match, UJXY. And that appears at two positions in the same block of text, 66 and 261. And so that's 195 apart. And so we take the factors of 195, which are printed here, and we see that the only one in common between those two is 5. So this was almost certainly encoded, or excuse me, enciphered with a 5-character long key. So knowing that, you can then break down the ciphertext into 5 sub-blocks of ciphertext, one for each of the indices in that key. So one for the first character of the key, one for the second character of the key. And each of those blocks of text will be vulnerable to the same frequency analysis approach that we did for a monoalphabetic cipher, which allows this to be broken. It does take a bunch of time because now you're doing that frequency analysis 5 times and trying to combine your results. And there are some other techniques that you can also use. But the first step was figuring out how long a key was used. And I thought this was a really nice illustration of that kind of thing that code breakers go through when trying to uh, break a ciphertext that they have intercepted. So let's move on from this. But if you want to get a copy of this ciphertext, just to see if you can break the 5-character key, feel free to hit me up uh, after the session, and I can provide that. So if the weakness in the Visionnaire cipher is that the key is short relative to the length of the message, so you repeat the key over and over, what happens if you just use a really long key? And as it turns out, Um, if the key is the same length as the plain text and it doesn't repeat, and it is actually random and not, you know, the dictionary read out or something like that. So if it's not something that's based on language, but it's just random characters, what you have there is called a one-time pad. And as long as you don't reuse it over and over to send different messages with the same key, it is an unbreakable cipher. In fact, the only unbreakable cipher. And these have actually been used. So, for example, number stations broadcasting over shortwave radio sequences of numbers. Um, Anybody could hear the message, but only people with the one-time pad are able to decode the message. There is a big problem with one-time pads. If you have to have a key that's as long as your message or all of the messages you need to send, and you can't reuse that key material, and you have to get it physically to the people who need to hear who need to be able to decode your messages, well, that's a problem. That's the key distribution problem. And how do you solve that? Well, we saw a lot of uh, that's where the spycraft comes in, or diplomatic couriers. You're distributing code books to everyone who needs to be able to decode these messages, and that's an incredible logistics problem that really limits how much you can use this technique, because every time you make another copy of a key, you run the risk of it getting intercepted. And if someone has your key book, everything is basically lost. So let's say that's not really practical for all purposes. There are places where it's useful, but not everywhere. So let's say that you were in charge of, I don't know, let's say major military operations in, just to pick a location, Europe in the mid 20th century. And your job was to control this army by sending messages that could be intercepted. And obviously, you need to be able to send messages to a large number of different recipients, and you need to send a lot of messages because there's a lot of coordination going on. You need a mechanical, automatable way to do this. We don't have computers yet, or they're very primitive and not portable. So you need a mechanical device that can be used to send secure messages. A wonderful example of this was the German Enigma machine, developed in the late 1930s. And it looks a little bit like a mechanical typewriter. Uh, we don't have a ton of time to go into the details of it, but I thought I would show a little bit how it works. You'll note that it has three wheels in the back, and those wheels are kind of like your magic decoder wheel that we've talked about in the previous sections, except instead of having the letters in order, each wheel translates one input letter to an output uh, in a mixed up way instead of in order. But you've got these three wheels. And so you can put those into the device in any order: 1, 2, 3, 3, 2, 1, 1, 3, 2, etc. There's 6 combinations. And then to set your code that you're going to be using, to set your key rather that you're going to be using for the day, you set the initial position of those, what they call them, rotors, to some initial state, some initial rotation state, which can be described by a sequence of 3 letters that line up with a pointer. And then there's also a plug board on the front. I'm not going to cover it too much. It just lets you swap arbitrary letters to make it even more difficult. Um, but then every time you press a key on the keyboard, electricity goes through those 3 rotors, bounces off a reflector, goes back through the 3 rotors, gets thoroughly scrambled in order, and then lights up a light that tells you your ciphertext character. So you press A, maybe it lights up O. And then the first rotor rotates one position each time you hit a key. So the next time you hit A in a row, it lights up something else. It might be W. Uh, and so every time you press a key, it changes the cipher text that it generates. And that continues. And the first rotor, when it finishes a rotation, the second rotor moves one, kind of like the mileage indicator on your car. So this was a really fiendishly challenging cipher to try to break, and yet it was very high stakes. This was critically important to the war effort to break this scheme, and it did adjust through the war to get more challenging, um, but it was eventually broken thanks to early work by Polish mathematicians, uh, and also some actual traditional spycrafts, stolen plans and stolen instructions that the French provided. And then the automation work of automating, identifying the key being used for the code of the day was performed by an English team at Bletchley Park, including Alan Turing, who is commonly called the father of computer science. So his story is fascinating. The story of all of these efforts are really interesting. They're documented in the code book, and I definitely recommend reading it. There's also been movies produced about Turing. Very interesting character. So that's about all I'll go into there. But I do want to mention that there are tools, and I'll mention the tools at the end of this workshop, where they can actually emulate an Enigma machine. So you can set it up, configure how you want your initial rotors to be set up, and then you can run messages through it and see if you can figure out how to break them. So these are very emulatable on computers today. So then we come to modern cryptography, and I wish I had the time and the mathematics to go into this in detail, but there have been some really, really, really important advancements in cryptography in the past, gosh, what year is it? In the past 50 years. Um, and those have been in the area of, how do we solve the key distribution problem? If I need to send a message to you, how do I do so secretly if we have never talked before? If we've talked before, we could have shared a key, and then future communications could be uh, encrypted with that key. But if we've never met before, I can't get you a secret message. So that was a key breakthrough. And here we are in academia. We provide that credit to Diffie, Hellman, and Merkle for the Diffie-Hellman-Merkle key exchange. Um, and then Rivest, Shamir, and Edelman at MIT. So they were at Stanford. And then at MIT, we had Rivest, Shamir, and Edelman who came up with the RSA crypto system, which introduced the idea of asymmetric cryptography. And the end result is that we've had this incredible breakthrough where it is now possible for two people who have never communicated with each other before to send each other messages that can only be read by the intended recipient. And this basic concept underlies all secure digital communications, banking, commerce, finance, government, everything that exists today. If you think about our world, how much would we be able to purchase online if anybody could pull our credit card number off the web, off the cable before it gets to the website? How much would we be able to do our banking, or share talking with friends if we didn't have the ability to do so with privacy? And so this has really led to just a transformation of the digital landscape and our ability to perform business. So I think it's been a really exciting time, and I definitely recommend that anyone with interest in this should take the courses in modern cryptography and read up on it, because it's really been foundational for what we do. Uh, at this point, let's actually go on and I'll give the resources. I just wanted to mention a few resources here. So if you are doing, say, a capture the flag challenge, and you've got a block of ciphertext in front of you and you want to turn it into plain text because there's a flag in there and you want to get the points, here are some tools that you can use to do that. I mentioned this website, decode.fr, which has uh, a lot of good information on it, as well as a lot of solvers. It has some tools for doing cipher identification if you don't even know what type of cipher was used. And it's all fairly easy to use, so definitely recommended. There's a wonderful tool called CyberChef, which was actually published by GCHQ and put out for free. And it's a general purpose data Swiss Army knife. It lets you do encodings, encipherments, decodings, translations, analysis. By dragging and dropping components into sort of a recipe, and then it just then it just applies it to your input. This is useful not just for Cipher challenges, but also in day-to-day work. I use this tool, I would say roughly weekly, to work with you know, translating malicious scripts found on websites or the like. So this is very useful in the real world. And then there's another tool called Ciphy, which is a higher performance coding, decoding tool that will um, handle some edge cases that CyberChef just balks at, where the input data is too large or the sequence of operations too large. And so that can be very useful as well. And then, of course, there's the book that I recommend that I think is just very entertaining and educational, the Code Book. So with that, I've reached the end of my material, and I think we have plenty of time if people have any questions that they'd like to post. I don't see any yet, but feel free to post questions if you like. And otherwise, I hope you've had a good time and learned something. And of course, have a great time at the rest of the Cybersecurity and Privacy Festival. It's a great event, and we're all really happy to see such a wide range of people joining us from so many different institutions. No questions in the chat so far, but a bunch of positive comments. So thank you, appreciate it. And if anyone wants to talk code ciphers or general CTF challenges, hit me up, let me know. We have a question. My thoughts about the recent break in the Zodiac cipher. You know, my thoughts. I think it's awesome that people are tenacious enough to work at these puzzles over so many years. Uh, I'm just really impressed. That's well beyond my capability, but I love that people are able to do so. All right, I think we're going to pretty much wrap it up there if there are no further questions. Thanks, everyone. You have about 1.5 extra minutes back. Enjoy the rest of the conference.